Okay. Hey everyone. So today we're going to continue off the app that we were building using the JSONPlaceholder API. So we are going to be using the users API now. So let's grab this, share my screen. So we're going to be using the users API and kind of merge everything together. So if we jump to just to give like a continuation of where we left off. So we'll say we'll start up Xcode. Let's run this. And now we see that we have here where we're showing pretty much using the photos API just to show all these photos. And just a reminder for getting that data, we're using the JSON placeholder API. So I'll just maximize this here. And it's just JSONPlaceholder.typicode.com. And then the endpoint we're going to be using today for this is the users API. So if we just click on this, let's zoom in. Okay. And we'll see that this is what pretty much the response is going to look like for each user. Decent size, and it does have some nested objects too. So we'll have to make some nested models to handle that. So we can copy this for now. Actually, let's just copy the endpoint. And then let's minimize this. And we can stop the simulator for now. And what we're going to do is if we run it, let's run it one more time. I want to show you what we're going to do. So we're going to add it. So the same way we have a tab here for photos, we're going to add another tab for users. So we're going to have to, and pretty much when in this tab, this is where we're going to call the API and show all the users data that we fetch. So we're going to start by creating a folder, and we're going to call this users. So let's just close, similar to how we have photo lists. Let's close models too, and let's close services. All right, so let's just say new folder, and we're going to call this users view, users list. And we're going to add one new file to this, and this is going to be our users list view model, list users list view. Okay. And pretty much like we just want to show a list of all the users that we have, and we want to make it that once we tap on them, we can navigate to a detailed view showing each of them. But before we get to that point, we have to build out the view. So let's copy this basic view that we have. Let's just copy the name since we have it now. And we're going to jump back to our content view, which is where our tab view is here. And we will go down, Command V, and let's give it the tab a name. So we'll say tab item. And let's add a vstack. And then for the image, let's just use a system image. And let's just use a person. There's a bunch of other images that we could have used. And if you want to see all of them, you can just pretty much just use, where is it? SF symbols right here. And you can just download that from Xcode. So let's maximize this again. I'm gonna zoom in a bit more so you can see. And I'll get rid of this. One sec. Okay. Yeah, so we'll zoom in. I know you see that we do. So the first thing we see is that we do see this tab here, but if we click on it, it's just pretty much showing hello world. One thing that's missing, you notice that we don't have any text below that, so let's just add that in. And it's going to be simple. It's just going to say users. Users. Okay. So say users there. And now what we need to do is, now that we have both, so now we can tell each tab separately much better. So what we're going to do now is jump over back to users list view and start building out what we want the basic UI to look for. So I like to map my views first, and SwiftUI makes this very easy. So I'll start off with that, and then we'll work on integrating the actual API. So let's just say list. And then let's just add some vstack of what we want the basic view to look like for this. So, and let's just jump back to our JSON placeholder API. And pretty much we want this entire block right here, because this is what our model is going to pretty much look like. So I'm just going to paste this here for now, just so we can have the visual on screen as I do this. And I'm going to comment this out. So one of the things that we have, so this is like just the basic list. We don't need to show all of this information on this list screen. We can show all of this information on the detail screen instead. So one of the first things I guess that we could use is name, since you want to know exactly which user this is. Or we could use username and then make it that once we navigate, we see it. So let's use username. And then we could have something like the company that they work for. And then we could also have, let's see what else we could use. So I could use username, the company, and we could add some type of address. So we could combine street and we could just add the city. Okay, so we have a basic idea of what we want to use for at least this view. So I'll start by saying text. And then I'll go with what they're doing. So I'll just say, the first thing I want is the user's username here. And then I'll say font, and I'll make this bold. And then below that, I'm thinking I could just have their, we could do address or we could do company. Let's do address. So we'll go with something like coolest light. Coolest light. And then we will add, for the city, we'll just add a city here. So we're doing it statically now, but what we're going to do is once we create the model and get the data from the model, we're just going to replace these static text with actual data from the API. So first thing I'm noticing is that this is centered. I don't want this centered like this. I want it, each of them aligned to the left. So to adjust that, we just have to give a parameter to our VStack and call this alignment and set it to leading. Okay, so you see it moves there. So the next thing I want to do is add the company. So I'm thinking for the company, let's make it that it is to the left, to the horizontally next to the name. So let's do that. So let's just wrap this in an H stack. And later on, if we decide we want to add more elements to the actual row view for this, we can later on. But for now, let's just start with a basic view with some static text and then build it out later. Okay, so the name of the company is, what is it? Whatever it is, Romagiora. And then we'll just copy that. And we'll paste this here. Okay, let's add some padding below our H stack so we can separate it from our city location. And let's push that down a bit. Okay, kind of like that a little bit better. And then let's add some different font style, foreground style. Let's just make this secondary. And you see it gets like this kind of lighter color. But I'm kind of feeling like I kind of want to switch the company with the city. So I just feel like that would be more beneficial. Let's paste that here, and then we'll just cut this and paste this back here. Oh, paste this here. Okay, cool. So that works. That looks a little bit neater. So now that we have this, what we want to do is first, the first thing we can do is, instead of having all this VStack for each row, we can actually break this down and pass this in, break this down into its own reusable view, SwiftUI view, which is pretty much one of the beauties of SwiftUI. So to do that, we're gonna create another folder. We're gonna call this row view, user's row view. And let's just create a new folder. I'll just call this user row. And let's create a new SwiftUI file. And we call this user row view. And literally all we're going to do is jump back to list, and we're going to take whatever we had in as the row and bring it over to user row view. So let's just command X, cut that. And then we're going to replace the text that we have here with this. And now if we jump back to user list view, we can just type in user row view, and we will see the same experience. Cool. So the next thing we're going to do now is create our model that we can use to represent each of the data that we had. So we already have a models folder from our previous stream. So what we're going to do now is just jump inside models, and we're going to add a additional model to handle for each user. So I don't remember all the parameters for the API, so I'm just going to place this again here just for now, just so I can use it as a reference. And I'll say struct user. And from our previous stream, we also found that we have to add the decodable so that when we're trying to decode this data from the API, that it can be decoded. So we have to add that protocol. So let's say decodable. Also, we also have to add identifiable, since we are going to be showing this in a SwiftUI list, so it can be identified. So we'll say let ID, and that's an int. Let name, which is a string. Let username, which is another string. Let email, string. And then now for address, we can see that address is a nested object. So we're going to comment this for now, and we're going to have to create a new struct just for address. So we'll say, let's call this user address. And we also have to make this decodable. I don't think we have to make this identifiable, but if when we're trying to run it and we see that issue, we'll just jump back here and just add it. So for user address, let's see what we have. We have street, suite, city. So let's treat let's suite. And then let's city. Most of them are strings. This is good. String. And then let's zip code. Zip code is actually a string. I guess because it has a hyphen. And then we have another nested object called geo. But what we can do now is we can go back up to user. And since we have the class that we want, the struct that we're going to use, we can just add it as user address. And then jump back to user address and finish adding the additional parameters that we need. So let zip code, let geo. And then this is another nested object. So we'll just comment that for now. I will make a new one. So say user geo. It's really location, but this is geo. And again, remember, we have to make it conform to decodable so that we can decode that object from the API. And then we'll have a parameter for that, which is also a string. And then long, which is also a string. I don't know, I guess I was thinking that those would be doubles or so. All right, so now we'll just say user geo. What is it? Okay, user geo. And then some of the other parameters. So we have that nested level, and then there are some additional parameters that are on user. So besides address, so let's add those in. So I have to keep scrolling up and down. So I'm going to cut some of this just to get rid of it. So I'm going to scroll down all the way down there. And then we'll say let phone. And make this a string. Website. And also make this a string. And then there's another nested object. So this is for the company. So I add one more struct for this nested object, and the one I'm referring to is this right here. So we'll say struct company, and then we'll say decodable, as we mentioned. And then we'll say let name, which is a string, let catchphrase, which is another string, and then let BS, which is another string. So now we can just scroll back up and then say let company, BF type company. And now we have all the models that we need. We can actually just get rid of this comment now and get rid of that. So we have all the models that we need to represent the data. And again, so we're going to be using user inside our user list view. and using it inside our list and passing it to our user row view. So to get to that now, we have to actually go to our service file. So let's just jump to services. And we created this in the last stream. So we're just gonna jump into it right now. So when you go to services, you will see that we already have a API services and we have a function for called fetch photos. And pretty much API services is the class that conforms to this. And the reason we're doing it this way, instead of just using API services and then just creating the functions inside here, is because we want to make it that the service can be testable, create unit tests from it by creating mock versions of the API services. Anyways, that might sound a lot, but once we start doing it, it might make more sense. So we already have the function for fetch photos. So now we need to do func fetch users. And we're going to use the same method. We're going to use Swift concurrency. So we use async, and I want this to throw so we can handle the errors customly. And then we're going to have it return an array of users. Okay. I don't know why. I don't like that it's changing. Let's change this from user to actually just user model. Yeah, I don't want to keep saying why. I like when I can see my custom classes or structs in this color, so I'll stick with that. All right, so excuse me. So the next thing you'll see is that our class that conforms to our protocol or API services is complaining that we don't meet the conformance of it, and that's because we have to add the new function that we added to the protocol, which is fetch users. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do now is we need to get the endpoint for our users. So we'll jump back to our JSONPlaceholder API here. And we'll just grab the URL right here, copy it, dismiss. And then one thing that we could do is say we could go this route and just say private let user endpoint and make this a string and have it equal to the URL. But there's a much better way to do this. If we did this and say we used user endpoint and we followed pretty much the same steps, converting it to a URL and using URL session, it would still work, but there's a better way. And the better way that we can do this is by using an enum. So before we complete fetch users, actually let's do it right like this for now, and then we're going to come back and then switch it to an enum, and I'll show you that it still works the same as expected. So we'll keep it separately as two separate endpoints. What we're going to do instead is, so let's just jump back to fetch users. And the first thing we have to do is convert a string to a URL. So we'll say guard let URL equal URL, and it takes a string. And then we're going to say user endpoint. And then we'll say else. And we don't want to just return. We have throws here, so that means we're expecting throw errors to handle it that way. So we'll say throw. Oh, wrong place. Yeah. So we'll say throw. Then we'll say API service error dot invalid URL. All right. So now we have the URL that we want. Let's just give some space. And what we want to do now is actually use this URL. So from a previous stream, we saw that when using URL session, share data task, that shared data task, it's gonna be a function that can throw an error. So basically, let's say data. So response try equal try, and then we'll say URL session not shared. Now we have to make sure we find the one that's asynchronous. Conveniently right now it's at the top, so we'll just click that. But it might not be at the top for you, so you just make sure you click the right one. And we're going to pass in the URL that we just created. And you're going to see a couple errors. So it's saying expression is async, but it's not marked with a wait. So we just have to add a wait here. Yeah. Okay. And again, just remember, because this is a try operation, it's best to add it inside a do catch. And if you don't, more than likely Xcode is just going to give you a bag of errors and warnings. All right, so we get that right there. For the catch block, let's just temporarily, actually, we could just have this throw a custom error. So let's just say throw API service error.custom, and let's just throw in whatever Apple gives us as the system error. Okay, so we're still having an error here only because it's saying we want to return, this function is supposed to return an array of user models, but I'm not returning anything else. This catch case is fine though, since it's either you return an array or you throw an error. So I'm going to temporarily just put an empty array here just to silence this error. I mean that warning, our error warning, and we'll just continue with the work that we're going to do. So the next thing now is that we want to check that the response is correct. So to check that, we can say guard let HTTP URL response, and we will simply just say response, and then we're going to cast it as a HTTP URL response. And then the next thing we want to check, so now the reason why we're doing this, converting it to a HTTP URL response, is that we can get this so that we can get the status code. So now that we have the status code, we want to check to see that if it's a valid one, whether it's between 200 or 299. So to do that, we say 200 dot 299, and then we're going to check if our status code is in that range. Status code, and if it is, then we'd pretty much just continue to the next step. But if it isn't, we want to throw an error. Invalid response. And we created these custom errors in the previous stream. If you want to just give that a chance, just to take a look, just to refresh your memory, you can do that. All right, so now that we know the response is good, the URL is good, now we can start working with the data. So the first thing we're about to do with the data is see if we can decode it to an array of user models. So we'll say let users, and then we'll say try, and then we'll say JSON decoder, and then we're going to call the decode function on that. And the type, how we want to decode it to, we want to transform data right here to a different type, to our user model type. So we'll say, what do we want to transfer it to? Our user model type. And we have to specify self. And then what do we want to turn into this? And that's our data. That's right here. So I'll just remove this and just put data. And now, instead of returning an empty array, I'm going to return users, which is now an array of user models. All right, cool. All right, so right now our API our service has been updated to being able to get all users. So that's our first step. So now we can jump back to our users list view. And right now, as you see, we're just using a list. I'll wait for the preview to come up so you can see it. So we're using a list, and we are using this user row view, which is some static data that shows this. What we want to do now is actually find a way how we can get the data from the API and then pretty much show it inside the users list view. And to do that, we're going to use we're using MVVM, so we need a view model. So we'll go back to our user list folder. We're going to say new file. We're going to use a Swift file, not a SwiftUI file. I'm going to say users list view model. And then I'll say, come down here, class, and I'll say users list view model. I'll make it an observable object because I want to listen for changes that whenever we get our users array gets updated, that we can use it. So to be able to even use the services, the first thing we have to do is say let services. We have to add it as a dependency for user list view model. And dependency is, when we're saying dependency, we're basically saying that we want this view model to have an extra ability that comes from outside. So we'll say services, and then we'll say API services. And then we have to update our initializer. And we get API services here. What we can do to make this a bit simpler is to give a default value for API services, so that every time we initialize user list view model, we don't have to add in a services parameter. So we can say API services impl. However, when we're writing unit tests, we're going to create our own version of this service. And we already created this mock service in our previous stream, so we pretty much can use it. Yeah. So the next thing is, let's see if we can actually create a function to get the data from the API. So we'll say func fetch users. And we will say, make sure that async is async. And now what we want to do is use our services and then say services.fetch users. So let's say like this. So we have to actually wrap this in a do catch too, since this is a throwing call. So say do catch. For now, let's just print this error. And then let's jump back to our do, which is where the success case is going to really happen and the starting for getting the API. So now we'll say services.fetch users. Let's just give some space here. Let's just say equal, and let's just say users. So we're going to get some errors here, or some warnings. Good. So it's saying that we have to mark it with a try. And then it's going to give us one more error saying that we have to mark it with an await, because this is a asynchronous call. Cool. So we get users here. And now we have access to the users. So the first thing I want to check to see is, are we actually decoding the users' data properly? And so I want to check if this actually has something. So we're going to actually just print it. So we'll say users, and let's set some breakpoints here. So one at users here, and then another at in the catch box, just in case it fails. So we don't really have any way to call this function yet. So what we have to do is introduce it to our view. So we'll jump back to our users list view. And then we're going to add a way how we can use it. So we're going to say a state object. And then we're going to say var view model. And we can just say, there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. So I'm going to go with this. So I'll say, what is this again? Users list view model. And because we already made services, give it a default value, we don't have to initialize that services parameter. So now the next thing we're going to do is, just to check that this is working, is we're going to add a task on our list. And we're going to say await view model fetch users, right? And we're just going to run this. And again, all we want to see is making sure that the data is decoding and we're actually getting some data. And we have our breakpoints set up in here. So let's just give that a second. Oh, we have to actually go to the tab. All right, so because originally we're starting off on this tab. Let's just close that. We're starting off on the photos tab, which is the first stream, but since second stream, we're going to be in the users tab. So now when we click on it, this is good because one, the first thing we notice is we're still in the do block and we were able to get here. So that means we do actually have users. Another way how you can check too is you'll see users pretty much mentioned right here, which is pretty much all the variables in the context that we are. We can, in the scope that we are, we can see all the variables. So you see that we have that data. Either way, I still want to see if we can get this to print. So we see it printed here, and we see all this data here: JSONPlaceholder API, ID, Leon, Graham. And if I jump to my API just to look at the result and compare them, you see that Leon Graham, username Brett, etc. So this looks hideous. Like when you print it like this, it's really hard to follow. So another way how you can see that without printing is by using dump. So let's just run that again. And I just want to show you the differences of using dump versus print. So let's go. Jump back to the users file, users tab, and we're going to press next. And you see right away, you see the difference. You can easily read it much better. You can see Lehan, Graham, Brett, etc. So you can use dump if you want to get you want to print to the console in a more readable manner. So now that we know our API is working, and we're decoding it properly, we can just minimize that and let's maximize this. And we're gonna get rid of users, that dump right there. And instead of just using let users here, we're gonna create a publish variable and we're gonna call that users. And the reason we're using publish is because when you're inside an observable object and you mark a property with publish, what's going to happen is whenever you make any changes to that property, whenever you make any changes to that property, say inside your view model, it's going to automatically cause the SwiftUI view that's checking that property to reload. So basically it's a way how you can see the changes right away, or any changes that you make right away in your SwiftUI view. So we'll call this an array of user model. And let's just set this to that empty array. And instead of init creating a new users variable, let's just set that to that. And we are going to get an error, but I want to show you an error that's going to come up, but I'll show it after I pretty much update our view. So the first thing is, so what we're doing now is whenever we call our API, we're setting that user's data inside our user's property here. And now what we need to do is actually use our user's property in our users list view. So we can say this, instead of not using anything, we'll say view model.users. And then to access each user in our array, we'll say user and then say in. So if we leave this as is, we actually won't see it being used right now. And I'm pretty sure I can just show you in the preview. So let me get rid of this. Okay, so it's the same user each time, but you notice it's a different amount. So the amount of rows that you're seeing here is based on the amount of elements in view model.users. So that's why you're seeing that. But I'm still using some static data. So if you jump to user row view, we see that we're just static using it. We're not using the data for each user, which is this. So to fix that, before I do that though, I want to show you an error. Oh, I thought that would be issue. Oh, it's not issue yet. But so let's do that now. Let's update our user row view to actually use the data from each user that we got from the API. So it's mad easy too. So you have to just jump to your user row view. And you're going to introduce a new parameter. And we're going to call this user. It's going to be of type user model. And now pretty much all these spaces where I was using, say, username, city, address, street, user street, and then city, and then company, we're going to replace those. But before we do that, let's just update our preview. And let's just add some basic stuff here. So let's just say nerdy, and then nerd, and then yo.com. And then for user address, let's just add in some stuff real quick. Test street, suite, and then just put Kingston here. And then for zip code, we'll do 0900113 or something like that. This is a problem with previews though. It can be really annoying doing this. Filling them out for each case that you might have. So let's just add in some stuff there. And blah, blah. And I'll say google.com. Oh my gosh, I feel like this is another nested object. So, oh yeah, let's give the company a name. Let's say YouTube. And catchphrase, some stuff. BS, let's just leave this empty for now. All right, anyways, so let's jump back to the main, for the fun parts. So users, and we'll replace Brett with username. And then for city color slide. So let me show you where I'm referring to. Yeah, let's minimize that for a second. All right. So color slide was the street here. So let's just say we're gonna, since we're using this inside a string, we're gonna say like user dot street. Oh, I think it's address dot street. Yeah. And then for Gwen displays is user address dot city. So we'll replace this one too. Address dot city. Okay. And then for the company, I think it's just user company.name. Company.name. All right. So let's minimize that now and let's maximize this. User.company.name. Now we have to do one more thing so that we can actually see this inside our view. We have to now make it that this user role view takes in the user parameter so it can fill it with data. So it's a user. And then if we load our previews, if the previews finish loading, you'll be able to see it. And each row will have a different info about each user. Previews using mad, so I'm just going to run this. Let's minimize that again. Oh, looks like it's loading. Okay, cool. So you see now each row has a different user with different information. And if I should open a placeholder, let's just go here. See, the first person was Leon Graham, which is Brett. I'm using their username. So Brett, and then the next person was Antoinette. And you see their data right there, as well as their street, Victor Plains, followed by the next person should be Samantha. Okay, so that's looking good. So we're matching it exactly with the data that we have. So let's maximize this now. And one thing we want to do is make a couple changes. So I want to be able to see a navigation title here that basically says users. So to do that, we're going to have to make a quick change. So we're going to cut this temporarily. We're going to start by typing navigation stack. And then we could say vstack. And then let's add in back the same exact stuff that we had. Okay. Not showing right now in the previews. Oh yeah, we have to add now to add the title, we have to say the light is bright. So we have to say that navigation title, which is basically just adding a new navigation adding a new modifier to our view. And that's basically so it has a different ability or feature. So navigation title. And then we will say users. And now you will see the title at the top of the screen right there. But let's see how it looks when we actually run this. Let's just give it a run. I can get rid of breakpoints there. Okay. All right, so let's jump to the users tab. And we see it, and it's working as expected. But if you notice, we see this issue where it says publishing changes from background thread is not allowed. That's just but it's not allowed. Make sure to publish changes from the main thread. So it's complaining about where we get the data, and then we're updating the users property here. So the problem it's saying is that this is an asynchronous function. We're updating users to be used on the main thread. We're updating it asynchronously to be used on the main thread, which is inside our SwiftUI view. So to fix this, which you shouldn't do, any UI update should always be done on the main thread. So to fix this, we can just mark it with a main actor decorator. And now if I rerun this, you'll notice that we won't see this purple warning anymore. So let's just give that some time. Get rid of this. And let's jump back to our screen. I will go up and down a bit, press some stuff. And you notice that we don't see it. We're still good right here. Okay. So now we don't have to worry about that issue. Okay. The next thing we want to do is that we want to show loading spinner as we're getting the data, because sometimes APIs sometimes can take a lot of time. The user might just have a horrible connection and it might take them some time. So to add this in, mad easy. Way how you can do this is adding another publish variable. And let's call this is loading. And we can set this to a bool and say false. And what we're going to do with is loading is whenever we start using the API, like we made an API call, we're going to set is loading to true. Right? And then what we could do again is after we get the data, we could set is loading to false. Another place where we want to change is loading to false, like we don't want to see the spinner, is if the API call finished, but we had an error. So we'll say is loading is false too inside the cache block. Okay, so there's a better way how to do this instead of writing is loading 2 extra times, but I'll show you that after. So we'll jump back to user list view, and now we need a way how to show a progress view if that is loading property is true. So an easy way to do this is by adding another modifier, which is a new ability. So let's say, let's see where VStack ends right here. So I'll say overlay. And then in overlay is that basically whatever view do you want to show on top of this view. So I want to show a progress spinner on top of our VStack whenever is loading is true. So I'll say if view model is loading, this is true, then we show a progress view. And let's just add some text for it. So we'll say fetching all users. Dot. So this might happen really fast since like the JSONPlaceholder API is a pretty fast API. So we might not see the spinner right away. So yeah, it was really fast. It didn't even take a couple of seconds, less than a second. So a way how we can check this really fast is I could say, one, I could just set this to true. I could make this true and then it would just spin on all the time. But another way I can do this is instead of setting it to false here, we could just remove this false, which is what would hide it. And then if we jump back to review, you'll see the spinner pretty much there. And it's going to stay like that because we're never setting back is loading to false. But if we add this back and then rerun it, and then jump back to user screen, you notice it came up, but it was so fast. This API is just too fast for that. So now we have a benefit where it's like basically if the user knows if data is being fetched, they're not just left in limbo. So as I said, there's a better way how to do this instead of saying is loading is false here, is loading is false here too. What we're going to do instead is use a differ. Now a differ is basically it's going to be the last thing ran inside this function. So we know this is going to happen. So if I run this again, and I jump to user, you see that? Yeah, we see the loading spinner gets dismissed. So we're good there with the progress view. The next thing we want to add now is the error case. So we want to be able to show an error alert, the error pop-up, if we have an error. So we already set up our custom error cases. Yeah, let's zoom in a bit more. Yeah, we already set up our custom error cases. So we just got to jump to services and then scroll up. And you see that this is our custom error. So we have invalid URL, invalid response. We have a custom one, and we also have readable error messages that would be more beneficial for the user that we want to show them. Invalid URL. If it's an invalid URL, we simply just show invalid URL, invalid response. Similar thing. If we have a custom error, we write something went wrong, and then we pass an error message received by Apple. So we kind of have our API returning us errors in this case. So what we're going to do now is basically set it up that we can show an error alert when this happens. So similar to how we did for this, we're going to add two extra properties. And then the first one is going to be show error alert. That's going to be a boolean. And then we're going to have one more, and this is going to be our publish var error message. Okay, I just initialize, just make it empty for now. So this is pretty much only going to be changed whenever we say we're inside. We only really need to set this whenever we're inside the catch block, because that is when the API would have failed. I'm just getting this space. Excuse me. All right, so what we're going to do now is say if let custom error. So we need to convert the error that we usually get inside our catch block to our custom error. And our custom error is service, the one I just showed you, API service error. And then inside here, if we find that we can customize it, what we're going to do is say error message is equal to custom error dot error message. And this error message again is the error message property that we have inside our enum, which provides a string for based on whatever error case is set or sent to us. So once we have that, once we have set that, we can now do show error alert, and we can just toggle it. Toggle it is just whatever value. If it's true, we toggle it. We change it to false. If it's false, you change it back to true. Okay. Now we actually need to implement these two properties now inside our view. So our error message and our show error alert. Right. So we will jump to our user list view, and we have to add a new ability or new modifier to our VStack. So let's just watch where it ends so that we add the modifier at the right place. So I press nearby the first curly brace and it shows me. And then I'll go here and I'll say alert. And I'll go with this one. This one's straightforward. Title. And the first thing you see that it requires is a binding boolean. And we already have that. So we have that as that's the show error alert property that we added to our user list view model. So to use that, we can say $view model, and we can say show error alert, and then we'll say alert. And for text, go like this, and we could say view model dot error message. Oh, error message. Cool. So now, whenever show alert is true, which would only happen when we have a error, we're in the catch block and we have an error, we would toggle it, and then we would, inside alert that we would show the error message. And again, the error message is being set in here based on our custom error message. So if we run this now, the API isn't going to fail. So we have to find a way how to make it fail. So one way is I could just mess up the endpoint. So this is our user endpoint, remember? So I jumped to services and scrolled up pretty much. And I'm just going to remove like some letters from this endpoint. And now if I run the app, nice. And we go over to users. You see that we get an error alert here saying that something went wrong. And then we see the other portion that Apple provided. And we just can dismiss this. Okay, so now we can basically handle for potential errors that might come up by showing an alert. The next issue I'm seeing is that if there is a case where, say, we don't have any users, we see this basic empty white screen, which is honestly a horrible experience. So all we want to do is let's add a basic view that basically tells the user maybe no users are available, maybe something's wrong with your internet connection, but let's just give them some information for handling this empty state. So what we can do now is jump back to users list view, and we're only seeing this empty state when users array is empty. So we know we just have to check if we want to show a different view, we could pretty much just check if view model that users is empty, or in this case is not empty. Let's show our original list. Paste that, and I'm going to move our navigation title from here and just put this on our VStack. Okay, and let's dismiss this. Okay, so now inside our first if case, we're saying if the view model, if users array is not empty, then show the list. Otherwise, if it is empty, what we can do, let's give it some space, is use a content unavailable view. And this is a view provided by Apple. I love this view. It's super simple. Apple uses it too. So we'll say content unavailable view. And you see there's a bunch of them. One that just takes a title, an image, image description, a sys title and system image, and then a different one that has title, system image, and description. So we'll take this one. And then for the first title, we're going to say no users available. And then for the image, we could just, for now, let's just say person. And then for the description, we could say like something like, please recheck, unable to fetch users, please recheck your internet connection. Or we could just say, yeah, this is that, unable to fetch users, please recheck your internet connection. All right. So now we will basically say if we have data for users, we will show the list. If not, we're going to show a content unavailable view. Just give the user some more detail on what might be happening. All right. So next thing we're going to do now is test this out. We're going to leave, let's jump back to services, and we're going to leave our users endpoint still improper in the wrong format, just so that we can force it to fail. We'll see the alert and we can see how we'll handle if the user's array is empty. So let's just run this again. Jump over to users, and in the array is empty, we basically see a unable to fetch users, no users unavailable, unable to fetch users. So the user now has like some detail on what might be happening wrong. Okay, so let's jump back to the user list view. And what we're gonna do is add back, we're gonna fix the error that we have here by putting back users. And then if we run this, we should see it behave as expected. Seeing all list of users, seeing the entire list of users. Okay, so let's jump back to users. Oh, we're still seeing, hold on one sec. We're still seeing this non-user, the content unavailable view. So let's jump back here, and it says if view model that users is not empty, then we show the list. So I know it's not this portion here. So for some reason, the users isn't being set. So let's check what might be happening here. So users, fetch users. Is this, let's check if this is the right endpoint. So let's jump to placeholder, Command C, users. Oh yeah, that seems about right. Command V, let's just paste it in, and then let's just run again. and get rid of this. Where is the API? Let's see what's happening here. Is the API call returning empty? So let's set a breakpoint at users here. I will run it again. And let's see the elements that we have in users. So let's jump over to users. Okay, so we're not calling it. Oh, we have to update our task. So let's jump back to our user list view. And you see we have our task attached to our list. So basically, it won't be set. Basically, this function isn't being called, or fetch users isn't being called because we're not showing our list unless the users is empty. So all we have to do here is just move this modifier. So get rid of that and move this to our VStack instead. So say VStack, paste that here. And now when we run, and we go over to users, you see that the breakpoint does get hit, and we can get rid of that. And then we'll continue. And you see again our list of users. Okay, cool. So let's jump back to our user list view. And we see so we're fetching our data. Oops. We see that we're fetching our data on task. So this will happen each time, and we can handle for cases where we might have an error or not. So let's just get rid of this extra space. Cool. All right. So what else could we do? So the next thing that we could do now is make it that our view, once the user taps on any of these rows, we get pushed to a detail view. So to handle that, we can, honestly, there's a bunch of ways we can handle this. So you could use a navigation link, or we could use a navigation destination, or we could use a navigation path. But we're going to go with a navigation link just for simplicity. And then in the next stream, we could try with like a different one by using navigation destination. So to use a navigation link to make it that we could navigate to a different screen, all we have to do is, let's maximize this. All we have to do is pretty much wrap our row inside a navigation link. And I'm just going to show you that. So I'll cut this for now, and I'll type in navigation link. And I'm going to look for the one that says destination and label right here. And then for label, that's pretty much our row. We'll paste that there. And then for navigate, then up here, which is a destination block, is basically where do you want me, what view do you want me to be sent to? For now, we'll just do text, and we'll say user.name. Okay, and let's run this. Minimize it a bit. Jump over to the user screen. And you notice that we get these arrows automatically, and that's from using a navigation link. But if we click it now, you see we get sent to a different screen which uses the actual user's name. So we can switch this to being username instead, so that you can see the actual navigation that is the same data. Let's run it one more time. And then if you click on this, go over to users, tap this, you see we click on Brett. We go over to the next view, it sees Brett. Antoinette, you see Antoinette. So this is just a basic view, this text here. So let's build out our detail view a bit more. So maximize again. And then we're gonna have a new view now, and then let's create a new folder. So we call this detail view. New folder, user detail. And then let's create a new SwiftUI view in here. I'll call this user detail view. User detail view. And pretty much inside here, this is where we want to send the user after they click the screen. So this screen needs to know what user was clicked. So we need the data for that. So to give it that data, we have to give it a new parameter. So we could say user. We're going to say user model. Now the preview is going to ask for this, but I don't have time for this. So I'm going to jump back to our user role view and just grab the grab what we were using there. So this user model, let's just copy this because you don't want to rewrite all this again. So we'll come back here and then replace it with this here. And now let's see if we can build out our user detail view using the preview a bit. So next thing we're going to do is use a VStack. Actually, let's add a navigation stack because I do want to add a so for the previews, we're going to need this navigation stack. All right, let me give you an example. So if I say navigation stack, if I say VStack here, right, and I say text, and I just use user.username, and I add a navigation title here, and this title is, say, the user's actual name. We aren't going to see this show up in previews. We're not going to see the title show up in previews with your name. But yeah, you see, you just see the text here, but we don't see the title, the navigation title here. But if we run the preview, we will see the title at the top. Let's just run this. And we jump over to users, click on one of these. Oh, it's actually not there. Okay, so we actually do need to add a navigation stack. So let's copy this, cut it for a sec. I will write navigation stack and paste that, and then we'll run it again, and now we should see the title. So let's jump over to users and let's click on any of these. Internet. Oh, we're not using the user detail view. So we have to actually jump over to user list view. And then inside our navigation link, use user detail view, pass in user here. And then if we run this again, let's minimize this error here. And we click users. Where is it? Yeah. And we click users, and I'll click on one of these users. We see the actual name of the persons as a title. Now let's go back to what we were doing before, though. So let's get rid of this navigation stack. And even without this navigation stack, we will still be able to see the title, and that's because our parent view has a navigation stack. So let's run this again. Blah, blah, blah. And you see Leon Graham here without the navigation stack here. But if we should show the previews, we're not going to see that title. And that's because the preview just works off what we have in this screen. It doesn't care about our previous screens. So like I say, you don't see it there. So we're going to add this here temporarily, though, just so we can work on it, see like what the actual visual will look like. So we go from there. So the next thing is, let's build out this detail view. I don't like the big title that we have here, so let's add another property, another modifier, and we use navigation bar title display mode, and we're going to use it inline, which is going to make the title, the navigation title, inline, smaller version. All right, so the next thing we need to do now is let's build it out. Let's add some data that we might need. So we could have this. Let's left align it as first. Leading. And now what we're going to do is say text username, and then what else could we do? We could have their actual, so we have their actual name at the top, and we have this here. I'm going to put a spacer just to push this up. And then below this, we could have their email. So let's say text user, not email. I'll see that there. And so I like this. What else could we use? Text. I feel like this is kind of okay. Let's not go too OD with it. So we'll say like form, and we're gonna use form pretty differently. So what we're gonna say now is let's add some padding here. So we say padding dot leading, just because I don't want them all the way to the edge of the screen. Command C, Command V. Okay, so now that's betterly aligned. What we're gonna do now is for all this data, so we want to show for the address data and for the company data, we're gonna show them in different sections in our form. So for the first section, let's just do the address stuff. So we'll see section, and then where's header? So this is header here. And then for header, we'll say text, and then we will say address. And then for each, so we're gonna pretty much just add in each detail that we have about the user's address. So the first thing is text street. So it's a user.address street. And let's get a preview sometime. And you see this is the UI how it's gonna look. So we're gonna have their main information up here, and then we're gonna have for each section in our form, we're gonna have address information in a section and then company information in a section. If you want, you can add your own sections too for any additional data you want to add. So now, next thing that we can do is text user.address. So we have street, suite, city, address, and city. So let's say something like city here. And what we could do is we could actually put these both on the same line. So it could be test street. Let's change test street to 1 million at 100 million. All right. So let's combine these though. So let's say let's X this out for a sec. And we're gonna do something like this. And we're gonna add a comma. And then open this back up. And we're inside here, we're gonna say user.address .street .city. Sorry. Nice. So we can get rid of this. I know it looks a much better experience now. We know this is this. Next thing that we can add is a suite. So we could say something like, say suite. And we can just say it like this. So user.address.suite. And let's give this a different suite name. What do they have inside here for suite? Oh, suite 847. All right, whatever. This is 876. Obviously, suite 876 there. So actually, we don't even. Okay, let's leave this. So we could just use this instead of saying suite. So suite here. And just leave that like that. I think we have an extra one. Okay. So the next thing is we have a zip code. I feel like I'd want to see the zip code right after this. So I'll adjust this and say zip code. Is this one word? I feel like it's two different words. And then inside here, we'll say user address .zip code. Okay, so now we have pretty much all the information from there except our our location, pretty much data. All right. So the next thing we can do now is add another section for the company. So we can kind of just, let's just type it out. So let's say section, and we're going to do this again inside our form. So it's a section, view, header. And then for header, we're going to say text, company. And then what do we have for company here? So we have name, catchphrase, and BS. I'm not sure what BS is. Our business slogan, maybe. Text user dot company dot name, and then we'll add one more. So text user dot company dot. This is called catchphrase. And I'll put my catchphrase here instead. So anyone can learn anything. What time, practice, and failures. Cool. Nice. All right, so this is our company information. So we have their address listed here. We have their company information. We have their email there. Our next good thing, so we do get their number, so we could add that there. One way I'm thinking to add that is by adding a tab bar item. So we'll have it right here in the top right corner. So how we can do that is, so make sure, ignore. So how we can do that is by adding another modifier. And again, that's just a new ability we want to add. So we'll say dot toolbar. And then inside toolbar, we'll say toolbar item. Let's maximize this again. The toolbar item. And then the toolbar item will say button. And then we could just go with one that takes a system image, or we could do it one that takes a label. I end up using a label a lot. Do one that just takes a label, just because I want full control over whatever I'm doing. So I'll say image, and then we're going to pass in a system image. And since this is for a phone, so we want a phone, we want like for the phone number that the user can click this button and we will start a phone call. We need an image that, well, looks like a phone. I wonder if, let's see, Apple usually just calls them simple names. So let's see if we can get some by just typing phone. Yeah, so we got this. I'm perfectly fine with this UI. So yeah, I'm gonna keep with this one. And now we have to work on adding the logic to actually make the API, to actually make the phone call. So really how this works is that like whatever URL, whatever phone number we have is gonna be like we adding on tell, it's like additional string. I think it's tell el dot dot, and then we're gonna pass that along with the number right beside it into, and we're gonna use it like a URL. So we're gonna be like open this URL using tell and the phone number, and that pretty much activates making a phone call by code. So to do that though, what's going to be better? So right now what we would have to do is add this logic inside our view, which is not what we want to do. We want to keep our view just for showing stuff, showing the details. So what's going to happen now, we need to modify our user detail view though to make it that it takes a view model. So to do that, we're going to jump to our user detail view folder, and we're going to add a new file. It's going to be a Swift file. So we say user detail view model. And then we'll say class user detail view model. Similar again, make it a conform to observable object. And then pretty much only thing that we need is the two things that we need, two parameters is going to need is this user parameter. Since instead of using this directly, we're going to switch to using a view model. So let's just cut this and get rid of this, and then all this code is going to complain, but we're going to fix that in a second. So jump back to our user detail view model, paste in this required property, and we'll add in the initializer. So now that we have the initializer, we need to introduce user or view to using this view model. So we'll say, again, state object, var view model, and then we'll make the type of user detail view model. And now all these points, so user detail view model now has that same user object that we were using before. So we have to, instead of just saying user, we have to say view model.user. It's gonna be a lot of these, so bear with me. So copy, paste, 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 paste here, and then again paste here. And now these errors should go away. However, the place where we were actually using regular user detail view, which is our user list, is gonna have an error. So let's jump to there. So it's gonna complain. Oh yeah, so it's gonna complain. It's complaining now because user detail view doesn't require a user property anymore. Instead, it requires a view model, and that view model requires a user property. So we parameter. So let's just pass that in, and now we should be able to run this. Oh, we got a fail. So let's just look what's the issue here. Oh yeah. So our previews as well now requires a view model. So let's just copy this. Undo. I want to get the U too. So cut this, and then let's update the parameter that we need. View model, user. It needs some fake type of user. So let's just paste back what we had before. That's one of the annoying things about previews. You have to keep on updating them. I wish they just automatically updated. All right, now for our simulator, if we go to the users list view again, you can see that it's behaving as expected. We can see our name, the user's name, their username, their email, and you can see the information about address as well as company. However, we're not actually handling the call button yet, which is this area right here. So again, the reason we added the view model is that we could handle this logic in the view model instead of doing this inside the view itself. So I'll click inside user detail view model. We're going to add another function and call this make phone call. Right? So again, I'm going to recheck this just to make sure that that's how we actually make phone calls, by just creating the URL using the user's phone number and adding on tel. So let me see. Let's see if I can just get it off the top of my noggin. So I'll say now select phone number URL. I think it's like this, phone number URL. And we'll say this is equal to tel. And I think it's like this, plus whatever we have for user, that phone number. And then what we're going to do is use something called a UI application. And then we're going to do shared version, and then we open URL. Honestly, what you should do is check if you can open URL. So let's do that first. So if can open URL, do this. Okay, so I have to make one quick change here. So this is requiring a URL, but I could just pass in the string. But to be safe, let's just convert our string that we have here to a URL first. So let's comment this out for 1 second. And let's say guard. And then get rid of this. And we're going to use a URL that takes a string instead. And we're going to repaste it in there. And then just do else and return. So if we can't convert whatever this number is and this tel to a URL, we're pretty much just going to return. Now we're going to uncomment this. And then for we're checking if UI application share that can open URL. We're going to check that. So we're going to use phone number URL here. And you see Xcode complaining that it doesn't know what UI application is. It's just that we have to add another import. So we have to say, and this is UI kit. And now we should be able to get that. Cool. So the next thing, what we need to do now is once we check that if we can open the URL, we need to actually, if we can, let's just actually open the URL. So we say UI application that shared that open URL, and we'll just pass in phone number URL. Nice. I want to check this to see if this is, I feel like this portion might be 1 or 2 slashes. So let's just jump to Google real quick. And we'll start by just saying Swift making phone call. How to make a phone call in iOS 10. Okay, cool. So it's pretty much just like this. So it's tell semicolon // and then whatever the number is, and then UI application open URL. Oh, but I guess there's a new version too, or this version. Okay. All right, so make a phone call, phone number validation. So this is a SwiftUI version. Yeah, they're doing all of this, but I think we're fine. So let's just minimize this again. And we should be good with this. So what we're going to do now is inside our view, let's jump back to our user detail view. We're going to say view model that make phone call. Now, to test this, you have to check that this is working. You have to actually run this on a real device. It won't work if you run it in a simulator. I'll show you what will happen if we do it on a simulator, though. It's just going to be something that shows up in our console saying that basically you can't do this. Okay, it's loading. We just ran this a while ago, so it shouldn't be taking this long. And we just added some basic code, not too crazy. Oh, we did import UI kit though. Maybe that's why it's acting so slow. Who knows? All right, let's give it some time. Attaching. While that does that, okay. So let's open up back. Where is it? Our simulator. I'll jump over to users and I'll just click on whatever user we have here. And if I click phone, actually, yeah, usually you get like a notice inside here, but it looks like it just doesn't do it in here. If I set a breakpoint though, let's just to show that, yeah, we're actually calling this. Let's set that. I will hit phone and we do that. Are we even making it to here? And okay, so we made it to, so we were able to get the phone number URL, which is like this now. So now we need to check if we can actually click it. So if it doesn't go inside here, that means that this didn't pass. Okay, so it looks like it didn't pass. And I think that's because pretty much we are using a simulator. That's why it's good to add this can open URL check. But if we wanted to just see the issue I was saying, that would, the error alert that would come up, is we can copy this. And then instead of doing the check, let's just call open URL right off the bat. I'll run again. Jump over to the users, go over here, and now I'm gonna dismiss some of this stuff. And then let's go back, open our simulator, and like if we click the button, I forgot we had a breakpoint on. Okay, so you will see this issue here that says fail to open, URL tell, yada, yada, yada. What you need to do is actually run this on your device to actually see this work. So we're good for that portion there. Just make sure you run on your device versus just through the simulator. If you're going to use this in like maybe some project and you need to send it to someone, also give them notice that you need to run this on device. So what we could do is need to run on real device to test calling. All right, cool. So let's get rid of that. Then we'll stop there. Stop the thing right there. And we'll run again. Maximum. Oh, no, let's not maximize. Let's just run. And you see so far, what we have is we have a list of users. We also have a detail screen with the user's information, and we can do that. So right now, this is looking pretty good. The next step that we could take is probably writing some unit tests, just to test our view model, and then maybe later on test our service class. So now let's close that. Oh, one more thing that we could change. I mentioned this earlier. So before we start adding our unit tests, let's update our services. So right now for our services, we have two strings here, endpoint and users endpoint. But if we look at the URL, the endpoint is like, the only difference is just this portion here, photos and users. So do we really need two different strings for handling this? No. So what we're going to do is we're going to use an enum to handle this. So we're going to say services, we're going to add a new file. And we're going to call it a Swift file. And we're just going to call this endpoints. And then in endpoints, let's say enum endpoints. And then we're going to have a case for, I think the first one was photos. And then users, right? And now for each case, we want to handle the URL a bit different. So we'll say var URL endpoint. Let's call it. We could do just URL, or we could do URL string. Let's call it. I don't want to call it endpoint because it's like inside an endpoint already. Oh, let's call it resource. Because that's what they kind of called it. And let's call it string. And then we're going to switch on self, which is the enum itself. And then for each different case, we're going to return something different. So we'll say return. And then for photos, we're going to move this. Pretty much we're going to use these endpoints over here instead. So let's just grab those. We can honestly just delete this from now. So let's just cut that. We're going to be crazy errors in our services class, but we'll fix that in a second. And now what we have to do is do this, Command C. And this is for photos. And then for users, we'll Command C this as well. Okay. And now, if we want to use any of these parameters, any of these endpoints, we just need to say endpoints.resource. Oh, endpoints, and then the case, and then we just touch resource. So let's update our services to use this instead. So we could literally just say, so see like how we're using endpoint here? I could just say endpoint dot. I don't want to just have this enclosed in here. So what we're going to do instead is say endpoints. We're going to update our protocol and make it that it accepts an endpoint. So say endpoint. And I will submit this an endpoint type. For this, we'll make it default to photos. And then inside here that we need a string, we're going to say endpoint.resource. Okay, I know we have to update up here though. So we'll say endpoint, and then just copy this and make it a parameter for fetch users as well. And what are you complaining about? Endpoint. I think it's because I am making this. Oh, no. it's the other function. So let's say endpoint, and then we'll say endpoint here again. And then we just replace this with endpoint.resource. And we should be good now. All right, cool. Now, all we did was just move this to handling the different endpoints inside our enum that we created for endpoints. So now we can look at the data and kind of find how each of them touch it perfectly. So let's run it again, and it will be the same experience. It's just that we're handling it much more efficiently now. So run. Oh yeah, we have to update one more parameter, and that's fetch photos. So what we could do to make this even simpler is give it a default value too. So see how we gave fetching photos a default value of photos, because we know that's going to be the endpoint. We could also give a default value for fetch users. So since we know users is going to be the endpoint. So let's do that. Cool. And now this error is good. And we'll just run this again. Oh, we have an error here. What are you complaining about? User list view model. Still requiring this. It shouldn't be requiring this, but let's just add this in for here. And we'll just say dot users. And then for this point, we'll just say dot, let's say photos. Oh, we have to add the label too. So endpoint dot photos. And now let's run this again. And it should be the same experience. As I said, we're just doing it more efficiently, handling our endpoints way more efficiently. So we still see the user's data. We have no issue with that. One additional thing that we can do is add a pull to refresh. So you see this in a bunch of apps where it's like usually the user can drag this and then the data will be reloaded. So to add that feature in, it's mad easy. You just have to add a refreshable modifier. So let's jump back to our user list view. And then in our VStack here, we'll add another parameter called refreshable. And it's going to be the same thing. So whenever you drag the screen to get the data, you pretty much are recalling the API. So we're going to pretty much call about the same API that we got, view model.fetch users. And now what we can do is if we run this and then minimize again, and we jump to our user screen and then we pull, you see that spinner at the top. Basically, it's recalling the API. We can check that by pretty much just setting a breakpoint here and then pulling it to refresh, and you see it does hit that point. So let's just get rid of that. And we can play it just for the fun of it. And you see it comes up. So we pretty much call the data again and that's a quick way how you can add that feature. Love that SwiftUI added that. Okay. So now the next thing that we could do is see if we can write some unit tests. And this would be a unit test. We're just going to do this for our view model just to make sure that it's working as expected. So this is our first one that we had it, and this was for our photo list view model. Pretty much got to change the name for this. But what we're going to do now is add another one for our user list view model. So to do this, we have to let's jump to our test case. And then we're going to add a new unit test class. And this is going to be a Swift test for unit test. I think it's this one. And then let's call this users list view model. And we could just add this in the same. Let's add this in here. View model test. Okay, let's add this here. Okay, so in our test right now, off the bat, we get all this boilerplate code. We don't need all of this right now. So I'll get rid of that. And what we need though is we need the view model that we want to test, and we need the services class. Invalid declaration of test. Okay. Okay, yeah. So we need to be able to test our user list view model, and we need our services class to be able to test it. So the good thing is, let's just start by this. So let's add the first thing that we need. So we need a var view model, and this is going to be our user list view model. Actually, it shouldn't be able to find this. Yeah, it shouldn't be able to find this. What we usually should be able to do, be required to do, is say testable. I think. Yeah. So it should have to say basically testable and then say import and then say JSON placeholder photos.mvvm test. I guess we have it already, so we're good in that way. Let me just jump to this one. Oh, I see. So actually, what we need to do is actually move this to our, so this is inside our regular target, because I was wondering why is that there? We need to actually move this to our unit testing target so that we have to import it. So to fix this, let's just delete this one sec. Delete, where is it? And open MVVM test, user list view model. Can we just change it by all right, so we have to do it this way. So delete, move to trash. And we can delete the placeholder that it's reference, remove that reference. Yeah, delete this, remove that reference. And then what we're gonna do instead, jump back to here. I'm gonna add a new unit testing. So we'll say photos, and then let's add a new unit test class. Test class, and then we'll say unit test, XC test unit test, view model test. Next, and then MVVM. Okay. Okay, so now this should be good. So let's get rid of this boilerplate code. And the first thing, let's see if we shouldn't be able to say var view model user detail. Okay, so you see how we're not seeing in here? We're not able to see user list view model anymore. To be able to get that, we have to add a testable that import, and then we're going to import our project. So now we have access to all those view models, all those properties and so forth. So it's a user, and you see it pops up user list view model. Make it a bang since we require this. And then the user list view model, remember it has a services property, services, and by default it uses the actual services class or uses real API calls. We don't want to do that. We want to use a mock version that just conforms to API services. So in our previous stream, we kind of built this already. Excuse me. We built it already and it was called, so we jumped to our mocks folder and it's called pretty much mock API services info. And it's complaining now because we did make some changes to our API services. So let's just update those. So we'll say endpoint. Endpoint. And this will just be endpoints. And also we added a new function, which is fetch users. So we have to update that. So we'll say fetch users, updating that. And then similar to how we have here, where we're handling for passing and photo results, we're going to need a way to handle for user results. So let's add a new one. And let's just change this to users. Yeah, if you want, if you need to, just feel free to just jump back to the other stream just to see how I built this mock API service, just to mock version to get more detail. And then change the type that we're returning to your user model. And then similar to this right here, we're just gonna switch inside this and say users result. And then in the success case, we'll get the users. So return users. Error, here's error. And let's just throw this error. So this is all fake. We're faking this service class so that we can test parts of our view model. So next thing is, let's just throw a similar to how I did right here. Just copy this and let's paste that right there. All right, cool. All right, so now we have we've updated our mock API service so we can use this as our fake service in our tests. So let's jump back to our user view model test, and we're going to create a var service, and we're going to make it that it's a type of mock API service input. And then, so two things to note. So whenever a test gets called, the first thing that gets called is this particular function called setup. And setup, so this is where if you want to do any extra assigning or anything like that, you want to do it in setup. But before you can do that, you have to call super setup so that it can do the stuff that it needs to do before it does your stuff, just to prepare. Now for view model, we have to actually give this a value. So they'll say user list view model. And remember, we don't want to use this version that uses the default value, because then we'll be using a real API call. What we want to do instead is use services and then pass in our fake service. So let's give service a quick value. I will just say mock API service input. We're going to pass this in as service. Now we'll say again, tear down. One thing to note, and this happens to me all the time too, make sure you're using, for the setup functions, make sure you're using override func setup and not override class func setup. Two different functions, so just be careful with those. All right, so next thing, expected in case, where are you expecting that? Oh. Now for teardown, it's called super.teardown. And this is where this is a teardown. So setup is the first thing that's called when you write a test. Teardown is the last thing. So that's where you can do all of your cleanups. So let's say view model equal nil, service equal nil. Okay, so now we're handling for that. So now let's finally start writing at least one test. So we write a test to handle for if the case is successful. So the first one will be, I'll also note any test that you're writing for unit test has to start, they can be long names, but it must start with test or you won't get this diamond. I'll show you after. So test successful. Yeah. Fetched users. Okay, so diamond didn't show up right now, but usually if I build it, it might show up. Let's just build this in the background. You see like, oh, you have this diamond here. This is how we can run all the tests. Oh, finally it showed up. But this diamond here also allows us to run a specific test if you just want to run one test instead of running the entire test suite. Okay, so for writing tests, unit tests, one of the things you want to start off is with given and when. and then. And what this is saying is that, like, given some data that you have, and then the when is going to be like when some change occurs, and then the then is like you want to do certain checks to make sure the expected changes are happening. I'm gonna start writing it out, it's gonna make more sense. So the first thing is we need to create some type of mock data. So we need a var mock user, and for this we could say user model. Because remember, we want to simulate a fake successfully fetched data from the API. So the user model is massive. So I think I'm just gonna jump back to user detail view and grab the user model that we use over there. Okay. So Command C, and then let's just jump back to our unit test. Yeah, that's way too big. All right. So now what we need to do is we need to make it that we're going to be able to, we're getting this data from the fake API. So to do that, we can say service.result. And we want to make sure we use user's result, because the photos result is for the photos API that we had. So it's a user's result. And then for the success case, we're going to pass in a array of mock user. Usually, honestly, you want to use more than one element in array since you're testing it, but man, the user's model object is so big, so I'm just going to change this. But I'm going to do it. I'm just change ID here, and then for name, I'm going to change this to Sam, and then I'll change username to Manta, and then I'll just say Sam and then for the address, I'll just change this to 2 something F. And for this, I'll just say something. This, I'll say Portmore. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, whatever. All right, so we can mock with this. So we have the first mock user, and we're going to add another mock user, call it mock user 2, which is one we just created. So given is like, so when you say giving, it's like basically you're laying out the data that you want to test with. You're just laying it out. You're not doing anything else. Now, for when, we want to test what happens when we make this API call. So view model, a successful API call. So it's view model that fetch users. That's all you need to write for that portion, except for, because even though this is a unit test, fetch users is still a asynchronous function right here. And we know that because we see the async right here at the end of the function name. So to fix this, so it's basically, even though it's a test, it's saying, yo, this is an async function and I'm not set up to handle async functions. So to add that ability for it, you just got to add async. And now that error will go away. Oh yeah, it's complaining about await. So let's say await. I know it goes away. So no, so remember, the first thing is, given this data that we have laid out, and we passed in what the potential users would get from the API. Now we need to call the API, which should give us this fake data here. And now we want to check the then, like we want to check to make sure everything is working as expected. So the first thing is, I gave it 2 arrays and 2 mock users. So I could check firstly if I could use XCT assert, and this is what you use to kind of evaluate if it's working as expected. So let's say assert true, and then with the first true, we'll say is view model that users is not empty, because it shouldn't be empty since we know we're giving it these users. So let's test this one first, and then we'll start adding in some more. So let's maximize this again. And then we'll click the diamond here. And honestly, sometimes tests can take some time to run. So let's give it some time. Installing it. I'll minimize it so you can see the simulator. Simulator starts doing a bunch of stuff. It actually makes a clone too as it's testing. So I'll leave this. So this is the clone that the simulator made over here. And you see it. So you see it's, yeah, so this one is the clone. You see it started doing some stuff. And it's a test completed, but I didn't usually. So we see the check mark here. So we know the test passed, but usually you see like a quick overlay right here. So let's run it one more time and see if I can catch that overlay for you. Similar to what you see build succeeded, you see like test succeeded or something. Oh yeah, test succeeded. So we know that this is working. So let's add some more tests. Let's maximize this again. And the next test that we can add, so we know the data is empty. Let's check to make sure that it's only 2 elements in the array. So I say xet assert equal, and we could say view model dot users dot count, and count should be 2. Another thing that we can test too is that if it's 2, and we could also check the values that we're getting from it. So we could check that the name for the first one is nerdy audi. So we say xet assert equal, and we'll say view model dot users, and let's check the first one and see that if name is equal to this. Didn't I not copy this? Oh, let's try again. Command C, Command V. All right, so that works. And we're going to do one also for the second element in the array. So let's just copy this, paste it, and then instead of 0 here, we're going to put 1 because we want the second element in the array. And then for name, let's put Sam. Nice. Let's run this before adding some more, just to make sure it's still working as expected. Okay, so test succeeds still. Perfect. So, oh yeah, you see these warnings up here. They're basically just saying that, well, variable mock user was never changed or mutated. Consider using let. So let's just change this real quick so we can just get rid of that warning. Get rid of that by just making it a let. Okay, because I'm not changing it anywhere. I'm just creating it and then just throwing it inside our success case, success result case. Cool. Now, next thing we're going to do is let's check to see if it's a success case. Some other things that we can check for is, so if it's a success case, is loading should become false after, as well as a show error alert should also be false. So let's see if we can, and error message should be empty. So if it's a success case, so let's check those. So xet assert false, and let's just say view model that show error alert should be false. And let's run it one more time just to make sure that adding this one doesn't actually break it. Okay, and I don't want y'all to think I'm just playing y'all, so let's make it that one of these will fail. So for this one where it says Sam, we know we're supposed to get Sam because Sam is here and Sam is here. Let's change this to be Sam with 2 M's. And let's see if our tests will actually catch that. Okay, so you see we get a test failed here, and it actually shows what the error is. Sam is not equal to Sam. So we know our tests are working still, even if it should fail. So the next thing is our show error alert. Let's add another test. Let's run it again to get rid of these big wrong error things on the screen. Ah, nice, succeeded. So the next thing we want to test, again, as I mentioned, we also want to test if is loading is equal to false. So I'll say view model that is loading, since it's successful, should be equal to false. And the next thing is that error messages should be empty, since we haven't set any error message. So we say xet assert true. I will say view model that error message is empty. And we'll run another unit test. And and like see what happens. And you still see all tests pass. So right now what we've did today, so just to do a quick summary, we wrote the unit test based on a successful. What we can do is also write tests for failure cases. We can also write tests for the class, for the service class itself. And that would involve making using a URL protocol. So basically, if we wanted to test the service class and not the view models like we're doing right now, we could jump to services. And what we're going to do, what we would do is instead of using a URL session that's shared here, we would make it that it accepts a URL session parameter. And then when we create our unit test in the create our unit test, we would pass in a fake URL session using a class that conforms to URL protocol. This stream is getting too long, so I might have to push that to the next stream. But I'm just going to do a quick summary over what we've done so far, so you have a good idea. So again, today we created a user list view using the data from users, and we were able to access that API by pretty much using Swift concurrency. First, checking that we could decode that, checking that the URL was valid, checking that, and then using that URL to get the data and the data response. Then also checking the URL response by converting it to a different type of HTTP URL response so that we could get the status code. And then when we got the status code, we check if it was between 200 and 299. Then if that's successful, we pretty much decoded the data to the model that we want, which is an array of user models. And then once we had that, we could just jump to our user list view model and then have our view model add the service, which is pretty much our same service here, as a dependency. Pretty much here, so you see API services. And we added a default value for that so that we could kind of not have to reinitialize that every single time. Created the function that we needed to fetch the users here. We also handled for error handling and also showing a progress view. However, even though we had the user view model here, we have to actually still introduce this to the view. And we did that by creating a state object and initializing the user view model here. And from there, we were able to pass the users inside a list and create our each list, which each row being represented by a user row view. And then if there's a case where, however, we didn't have any users, we showed a content unavailable view. Also, as we are loading the data and getting it, we would show an overlay. And this would be based on whether is view model that is loading is true. Another check is that we are also showing alerts if we end up getting an error message. And this alert will be handled by this property here from the view model, show error alert. And the error message that we have is pretty much can change based on the error that we got. And we also added a task, which is basically when the screen appears, we fire this API call. And the next thing is that we added a refreshable, so the user can refresh the data and get new data. The other thing is that we're able to now navigate to a different screen using a navigation link. Or you wrapped or user row view around that, and then push to our destination, which is a user detail view. Now for the user detail view, it pretty much just presents the data, whatever we had inside the user. So let's load up our preview so we can see that as we go along. Yeah, so you pretty much see that we're just presenting the data, some text, some their name, email, address, and company information. We, however, had some additional logic where we could make a phone call using the user's phone number. And to do that, just to see how that's done, we created a view model that takes in the user model that we're using in the user detail view. And then we have an additional function, like we mentioned, for phone calls, where pretty much we create a phone number URL using tell, adding it on to the actual number and passing it into it as a URL. Then using UI application to check if we can actually open the URL. And if we can, then we open the URL, which is pretty much how we make phone calls programmatically. But as we mentioned here, for testing this, we have to run on our real device. But yeah, so that was the user's endpoint using the JSON placeholder. The next thing that we're going to do now is actually using, well, in the next stream, is actually using the post API, where we can find posts for each user that a user made. Yeah, so if you like the stream here, just like and follow. Yeah. So let's see if, yeah, and next thing we could also start adding some types of accessibility. So that's going to be one feature that we start adding a bit more of, and that's going to be accessibility. Yeah. Oh, trying to find that button.